Clemenza can figure a way to have a weapon planted there for him, then I'll kill them both.
In the history of mob movies, Joe Pesci's portrayals of hyper-violent and short-tempered gangsters are unparalleled. His Oscar-winning performance in 1990 as Tommy DeVito, a volatile and unpredictable member of the Lucchese crime family in Goodfellas, captivated audiences worldwide. While Pesci's character was disturbing, he represented a toned-down version of the actual person. The creators of Goodfellas have remarked that the actual Tommy was so violent and merciless that audiences might have found his existence implausible. This video delves into the ascent and downfall of the real Tommy DeSimone. Born on May 24, 1950, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Tommy came from a family deeply entrenched in the Cosa Nostra. His paternal grandfather, Rosario DeSimone, and his uncle, Frank DeSimone, once led a crime family in Los Angeles. His brothers, Robert and Anthony, were also tied to the Gambino family in New York. However, the biggest influence in Tommy's life was his family friend and mob associate Jimmy Burke. Jimmy took young Tommy under his wing and involved him in various criminal schemes such as car theft, insurance fraud, and cigarette smuggling. As Tommy grew older, he also took on less glamorous duties such as serving drinks, food, and shining shoes. Although Jimmy was a big winner and also very popular due to his friendly and outgoing personality, he would never be a full member of the gang due to his Irish ancestry. Only full-blooded Italians are eligible to become official members of the Cosa Nostra. As such, Jimmy was an associate working under Paul Barrio, a capo of the Lucchese family operating out of Brooklyn, New York. Despite Jimmy's known personal charm, he concealed a dark side and was notorious for his volatile temper. As Henry Hill described in the 1985 book, Jimmy was unpredictable and wild. He could eliminate someone without a second thought, yet he could also be as gentle as offering a handshake. He instilled fear in even the most formidable individuals. His stance was ambiguous to others, but his intelligence surpassed that of his peers, and he was a significant earner. Jimmy consistently generated profits for Paul and the group, which is why they overlooked his erratic behavior. In 1963, Jimmy introduced a young 14-year-old Tommy to the 21-year-old Henry Hill, who had recently left the army. Jimmy and Henry had recently ventured into cigarette smuggling, which turned out to be very profitable. Jimmy tasked Henry with mentoring young Tommy, teaching him the ropes of the cigarette trade. Together, they were earning close to $400 a day by selling illegal cigarettes at construction sites and subway stations across Brooklyn. Their earnings were substantial enough that they invested in a semi-truck, which they used to make trips to North Carolina. There they would load up with cigarette cartons priced at $2.10 each, which they could sell for $3.75 in New York due to tax differences. This lucrative operation attracted attention, and soon the market was flooded with low-cost cigarettes as other groups, including the Colombo Gang, adopted the same smuggling strategy. But by this time Henry and Tommy had moved on to something else and were now stealing cars off the streets and shipping them to Haiti, earning them a considerable sum of profit per car. They were also involved in numerous other crimes, including extortion, fraud, receiving stolen property, and truck hijacking. Even in those early days, Tommy quickly gained a reputation for having an explosive temper and was known to lose his temper easily. He also seemed to enjoy hurting others, as it was a tradition of his that whenever he purchased a new firearm, he would first test it out on a random civilian that same day. Henry witnessed this firsthand one night as they walked down a street in Brooklyn. Tommy, who was 17 at the time, yelled at a random passerby, When the man turned around, Tommy pulled out a gun and shot him multiple times. The man was a complete stranger, and as he lay dying, Henry remarked, "That was cold-blooded." Tommy responded, "Well, I'm a bad cat." Later, Henry theorized that Tommy's ferocity stemmed from his older brother's past collaboration with the police, pushing Tommy to prove his loyalty by being the most ruthless in the gang. However, one aspect he didn't need to overcompensate for was his stature. In the film Goodfellas, Tommy is portrayed by Joe Pesci, who stands at 5 feet 4 inches, but in reality, Tommy was a towering and muscular 6 feet 2 inches, known for his intimidating presence. In 1948, New York International Airport, which would later be renamed John F. Kennedy International Airport, opened in Queens, New York. By the early 1960s, this airport was handling over $30 billion in cargo annually. This proved to be an irresistible draw for local gangsters, and soon the New York criminal organization had people at the airport watching for potential targets. No one was better at robbing the airport than Jimmy, who created a complex network of accomplices and collaborators who kept him informed about where and when the best loot would arrive. Since many of the airport's 50,000 employees were from the local area, it was easy for Jimmy to threaten them into compliance. Some were even already in debt to Jimmy and his associates. One example was an Eastern Airlines truck driver who had run up a huge gambling debt to one of Jimmy's bookies. In exchange for forgiveness of the debt, the truck driver accidentally dropped some bags of mail on the way to the post office. When Jimmy collected the bags, he found they held nearly $200,000 in cash, money orders, and stocks. While some airport employees were bribed or coerced into assisting, others courageously reported to the police. These honest individuals were often murdered by Jimmy and his crew, with Tommy frequently acting as the executioner. Corrupt police officers on Jimmy's payroll would consistently inform him of potential witnesses, who were then swiftly eliminated before posing a threat. In the span of a year, over 10 such individuals were murdered under Jimmy's command, and their remains were later found in the trunks of various cars abandoned in the airport parking lot. On April 7, 1967, Jimmy's group executed their largest heist to date. An inside source revealed that Air France transported American currency exchanged in Southeast Asia, routinely repatriating funds to the U.S. for deposit in American banks. Typically, a plane would carry 3 or 4 packages, each with $60,000, deemed easy to pilfer. On April 7th, Tommy and Henry arrived at Kennedy Airport's Air France cargo terminal, an empty suitcase in tow. Unchallenged, they accessed the vault with a copied key, stuffed their suitcase with cash, and departed with $420,000. The heist was executed without injury or gunfire and remained undetected for 2 days. Using his share from the illicit gains, Henry bought a restaurant on Queens Boulevard with the intention of running it as a legitimate enterprise, distancing it from his criminal connections. However, within months, it became a popular mob hangout, particularly favored by high-ranking members of the Gambino family. It was in this setting that Tommy would carry out his most notorious act. In early June 1970, William Benvena, known as Billy Bats, was released from prison after serving an 8-year sentence for selling narcotics to an undercover police officer. It's customary for friends to celebrate a mobster's release with a large party. Bats, a member of the Gambino family, was also a lifelong friend of John Gotti, who would later become the boss of the Gambino family. The celebration took place at a nightclub owned by Jimmy. Late at night, a visibly intoxicated Billy noticed Tommy sitting at the end of the bar. Tommy was only 20 years old at the time, and Billy recognized him as the 12-year-old shoeshine boy he had known years ago, before prison, now all grown up. He then made a sarcastic comment asking Tommy if he still shined shoes. Henry described what happened next, say, "I looked at Tommy, and I could see he was furious at the way Billy was talking. Tommy was going crazy, but he couldn't do or say anything. Billy was an adult, and if Tommy managed to land a punch on him, Tommy would be a dead man. We continued to drink and laugh, and just when I thought the matter might have been forgotten, Tommy whispered to Jimmy and me, 'I'm going to kill that son of a bitch.' While Henry tried to dissuade him, Jimmy egged him on, reminding Tommy over the next few days of the incident and how Billy had disrespected him. Jimmy likely did this because before Billy went to prison, he ran a profitable loan sharking business that Jimmy had taken over during his incarceration. Now, with Billy out and wanting to reclaim his business, Jimmy had no intention of giving it back. 2 weeks later, on June 11th, Billy was in the bar, drinking around midnight. Tommy entered the bar and saw that Billy was by himself, so he quickly whispered to Jimmy, who then went over to Billy, buying him more drinks. Tommy then turned to Henry, whispering, "Keep him here, I'm going to get a bag," which Henry understood to mean a body bag. While Tommy was away, Jimmy kept Billy entertained with stories, ensuring his glass was always full. Billy seemed to be enjoying himself, but 20 minutes later, Tommy returned, bag in one hand and gun in the other. As Tommy approached silently, Jimmy draped his arm around Billy's shoulder in a friendly gesture. Henry, watching from across the bar, recounted, "I was on the other side of the bar when Tommy pulled the gun out of his pocket. As soon as he saw what was unfolding, Jimmy tightened his grip around Billy's neck. 'Shine these damn shoes,' Tommy shouted, slamming the gun into the side of Billy's head. Billy's eyes widened in shock. Tommy struck again. Jimmy held firm. Blood started gushing from Billy's head, appearing black under the dim lights. The brutality of the attack left them assuming Billy was dead, so they quickly shoved his body into the trunk of Henry's car. Aware that Billy was a made man, they knew the Gambino family would stop at nothing to find his killers, making it critical to conceal his body where it would never be found. Jimmy mentioned he had a contact who ran a veterinary hospital in upstate New York, a place where no one would think to search. With no better options, they all squeezed into Henry's car for the drive. While on the road, a loud noise from the trunk startled them, waking Jimmy. The trio exchanged glances, realizing Billy was still alive. Tommy abruptly hit the brakes, silently grabbed the shovel, and they all stepped out, waiting for the road to clear of any passing cars. Once it was dark and quiet, they opened the trunk. Tommy then began to strike Billy with a shovel, while Jimmy attacked with a wrench. After just a few moments, they shut the trunk and continued their drive in silence. They arrived at their destination near morning and spent nearly an hour digging a sufficient hole. They then placed Billy's body in it, covered him with lime, filled the hole, and headed back to New York City. However, the saga with Billy wasn't over. 3 months later, Jimmy learned that his friend who owned the veterinary hospital had sold the land to housing developers. He then instructed Tommy and Henry to go back, exhume Billy's body, and find a new burial site. The two returned to New York City with Billy's body in the trunk of Henry's new Pontiac Catalina convertible and buried it in the basement of a saloon. A couple of months later, Billy was dug up again and placed in a trash compactor at a junkyard in New Jersey. For weeks, Henry couldn't escape the smell of Billy's body and smelled it everywhere, no matter how many times he washed his clothes or took a shower. He eventually burned the clothes he was wearing that day and also left his car at a junkyard. Tommy thought he was crazy and said that he would have happily kept the car so that the smell would remind him every day how he had taken care of that miserable bastard Billy. Another dark episode will prove just how wild Tommy was. During a night of drinking and card playing, their waiter, a 16-year-old named Michael Spider Yanko, neglected to bring Tommy his drink, resulting in Tommy shooting him in the thigh as a punishment. A week later, Spider returned to the card game, now with a cast on his leg, serving drinks again. At around 3 a.m., a drunk Tommy started yelling at Spider, ordering him to dance for entertainment. In a bold act of defiance, Spider told Tommy to go to hell. Enraged, Tommy shot him 3 times in the chest, killing him on the spot. There was a brief silence before Jimmy stood up and shouted, "Okay, stupid, if you're going to be a big jerk, dig the hole yourself." Feeling insulted, Tommy took Spider's body and dug a grave in the basement. Tommy was becoming increasingly volatile, with even routine shakedowns turning deadly. A few weeks later, While Jimmy and his crew were offloading stolen cigarettes at a trucking yard, the foreman, unaware of who Jimmy or his men were, demanded to see their union cards. He warned that without them, he'd shut down the loading dock. Jimmy first attempted to reason with the man, then tried to bribe him, and when those tactics failed, he resorted to threats. But the foreman stood his ground, refusing to be cowed, so Jimmy left. The following day, he dispatched Tommy and another crew member, Stanley Diamond, to deal with the foreman. The foreman lived in New Jersey, and during the drive, both Tommy and Stanley grew more and more angry at the situation, at how the man wouldn't listen to Jimmy, and now they had to drive all the way to New Jersey. Jimmy ordered them to simply intimidate the foreman into cooperating next time, but instead, they beat him to death in his own home. No one was safe from Tommy and his sadistic nature, not even his friends or loved ones. In 1972, Henry was convicted of extortion and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. While serving his sentence at the penitentiary in Pennsylvania, Tommy took advantage of this opportunity and attempted to rape Henry's wife, Karen. When she resisted, he instead beat her and left her. Henry was released on parole on July 12, 1978, and soon after, a local gambler named Marty Krugman tipped him off that Lufthansa was moving significant sums of U.S. currency into its cargo terminal at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Henry relayed this information to Jimmy, who then masterminded what would become known as the robbery of the century. The heist went off without a hitch, resulting in Jimmy and his crew stealing close to $6 million in cash and $875,000 in jewelry, which was the largest robbery on American soil at that time. Following the heist, Parnell Stacks Edwards, an associate of the Lucchese family, was responsible for getting rid of the getaway vehicle. His task was to drive it to New Jersey for destruction, but instead, he got high and left the car parked illegally in front of a fire hydrant near his girlfriend's home. 2 days after the Lufthansa heist, police found the getaway vehicle, covered in Parnell Stacks Edwards' fingerprints, linking him directly to the crime. Upon discovering this blunder, Paul Vario ordered Tommy to take care of Stacks, which he did on December 18th by shooting him 5 times in the head. This would be Tommy's final murder, as unbeknownst to him, the Gambino family was plotting revenge. Tommy had already antagonized the Gambinos with the murder of Billy Batts, and further inflamed tensions by killing Ronald Jarrett in 1974, who was a protege of John Gotti and well-liked within the Gambino ranks for his gambling prowess. 5 years after Stack's murder, on January 14, 1979, Tommy's wife reported him missing to the authorities. Tommy's wife stated she last saw him a few weeks before, when she lent him $60. The exact circumstances of his disappearance remain unclear, but it's known that shortly after Christmas, Jimmy and Henry went to Florida to sort out problems from a recent drug deal. Tommy would have joined them, but he was in the process of being officially inducted into the mafia, requiring him to stay in New York for the ceremony. While in Florida, Jimmy used a payphone to check in and learn about Tommy's initiation. However, when he emerged from the booth, his eyes were filled with tears. He said, "I don't know what's going on." He says they just took out Tommy. Gotti's group took him out. Tommy's demise was attributed to his unauthorized killings of Billy Batts and Ronald Jarrett, both affiliated with the Gambino family. The Gambinos learned of Tommy's involvement in Batts' murder, reportedly from Paul Vario himself, who was secretly having an affair with Henry's wife, Karen, which started during his federal prison term. Paul never liked Tommy due to his erratic behavior, and some speculate that learning Tommy attempted to rape Karen was the tipping point. However, these are only theories, and the exact details of Tommy DeSimone's last moments may never be known. It's believed Tommy was buried in what's considered a mafia graveyard near the Brooklyn-Queens border, close to John F. Kennedy International Airport, where other mobsters' remains were unearthed by police in 2004. Yet, Tommy DeSimone's remains have never been found. If you enjoyed the narrative of Tommy DeSimone's life, you'll definitely want to delve into the equally controversial life of his close accomplice and friend, Henry Hill, who survived to share his own tale. The video is currently on screen.